Ready?
Ready.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. We're going to give people a couple more minutes just to let everybody get signed on. Hi, Stacy. Hi, Brittany. Hi, Lee. Hi, Sean. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, we'll just give it another minute and then we'll get started. Okay, it's 5 after 12. I think we'll go ahead and get started now. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the eCertify webinar. What is it and how can it benefit you? My name is Beth Barker, for those of you that don't know me. I'm the eCertify coordinator for the Greater Des Moines Partnership. And the partnership is a member of the ACCE, which is the American Chamber of Commerce Executives, and eCertify is an official partner of the ACCE. The partnership has been utilizing the eCertify Online Certificate of Origin program since the fall of 2012. And we've had a number of companies that have benefited from its services, so we wanted to share this program with a wider audience today. And I'd like you to please welcome our presenter, Alex Sonafrank, who is eCertify's Customer Support Consultant in America. His office is located in Alexandria, Virginia, and he is our eCertify expert. If you have any questions during this seminar, we ask that you please direct them to Alex through our chat box. Hello, Alex, and thank you for presenting our eCertify webinar.
Okay, yes, thank you for the introduction. And so again, as mentioned, if a question comes up during the presentation, don't feel free to ask it during the actual presentation. And if I can incorporate it into what I'm saying, then I'll try and do so. So as mentioned, we're a system of processing certificates of origin electronically. We work with a number of chambers across the U.S. and internationally. And today we're doing this presentation along with Des Moines, as they're one of our oldest standing partners with this service. Just to give you some pretty brief overview as to what a certificate of origin is, it's a document that typically is used to have either reduced duties, or it's a document that's required by customs in order to facilitate a shipment into a foreign country. Essentially, what it is a document that says where the actual origin of the goods come from. So in this situation, obviously you'll be shipping goods of U.S. origin, and potentially you'll be able to get reduced duties, or in some cases even eliminated duties, by having a certificate of origin that's been stamped by a chamber that's clearly stating that the origin of goods is of the United States. The role of the chamber in this process goes way back to 1923, where they were decided to be the best organization to essentially legitimize the exporters. Because of the role of the chamber and its association with various exporters, it was decided that that was the best organization to be able to stamp these documents and to actually attest that they were done correctly. So as mentioned, some countries will require this document, and other countries it's just beneficial to have it. And more we're seeing a lot of cases where even beyond what customs is requiring, we're seeing the actual buyer of the good want to have a certificate of origin, just to, again, help legitimize who it is that they're working with. So we're a platform for doing certificates of origin electronically. We've been operating internationally for about 10 years and in the United States for about 5 years. In total, we're processing around 100,000 certificates a year at this point, which is pretty significant. We have shipments coming from multiple different countries, going to places all over the world. Right now, we're operating in the U.S. We had our start in Australia and New Zealand, and we've also got pretty strong foundations in Canada, Finland, and South Africa. That number is continuing to grow, of course, and we're hoping to, pretty quickly increase how many certificates we're actually processing. But as it is now, we're doing a pretty significant volume, and we have certificates going to every single country across the planet. In terms of what's allowed or how certificates are generally handled, there's an organization called the International Chamber of Commerce that actually sets the standards for certificates of origin. They're the ones that are responsible for saying, what are acceptable practices and what's actually required to have these documents created and processed. On the chamber side, they're responsible for appointing an authorized officer. So that's essentially going to be the person who's the primary representative to the chamber from the exporter company. They have the option of either doing a notary or do what's called formal undertaking. So notary was previously the requirement and the only way to do it, which means that every single certificate of origin needed to be notarized in addition to being stamped. In this case, the notary isn't required because the chamber has the option of what's called formal undertaking, which is that they have some method of validating the signature of the exporter once they receive the goods. So in addition to formal undertaking, they obviously will apply the stamp, and they'll provide this service to members and non-members. There are a couple of chambers that are very hesitant to provide it to non-members, but with the rule the ICC is set up, it is required that that service be available to both members and non-members. On the exporter side, they'll need to have a primary representative to the chamber, which we call an authorized officer. They'll need to sign off on some kind of formal undertaking. That essentially will indemnify the chamber of any kind of liability. So it essentially will say that the exporters basically reporting everything to the best of their knowledge and reporting it all correctly and honestly. In general, a certificate of origin and a commercial invoice are submitted together. So the invoice should mirror the information that's on the certificate of origin, and in a lot of cases, other documents will go along with the certificate of origin other than just an invoice, but at the very minimum, we'll see a certificate of origin along with a commercial invoice. Exporters do have the option of appointing a freight forwarder to act on behalf of the exporter, but that's not always necessarily the case. So obviously, if there are any kind of mistakes or if something goes wrong during this process, there can be potential penalties. Worst of all would be if, say, they had to pay full duties and potentially an extra fine to the customs official for either having information misstated on the certificate of origin, not having it properly stamped by a Chamber of Commerce in the U.S., or in some way having some kind of mistake on the certificate that caused penalties to be incurred on the exporter. So there's some potential big risk in shipping overseas, but one of the ways you can mitigate that is to be working through a Chamber of Commerce that's relatively familiar with the process and also able to provide a service like eCertify so that they're able to quickly get the certificate stamped. That way, even if there is an issue down the road, it'll be able to very quickly be corrected. There are some pretty common misconceptions around electronically stamped documents. So as mentioned, the notary isn't actually a requirement. A lot of people are still under the impression that every single certificate of origin needs to be notarized. That's not the case, as mentioned. There are ways where that's not going to be required, and if you're going through Des Moines, it's not a requirement that you have the documents actually notarized. A lot of people have the impression that certain countries aren't accepting electronic certificates, In particular, this would be in the Middle East. I hear Qatar or the United Arab Emirates mentioned a lot. In reality, those countries are accepting electronically stamped goods. I can guarantee that we have a lot of goods go into those countries, and we don't see any kind of issues come up because of it. As of the World Chambers Congress about a year and a half ago, which was actually hosted in Qatar, essentially all of the countries in the Arab League are accepting electronically stamped documents. The big exception that I need to make in this case is with Israel. So Israel, as a rule, doesn't bar documents that have been stamped electronically. It's just that they have extra requirements that we can't presently do electronically. If you have a lot of Israeli shipments, I would say get in touch with us after the webinar so we can kind of work through what we need to do there. But Israel specifically is a special case, so I do need to point that out as a disclaimer. A lot of people also have the impression that chambers need to be in some way certified or validated to process certificates of origin. That actually comes from the fact that internationally only certain chambers are allowed to stamp and process documents, and there actually is a process of certifying chambers of commerce to make them legally able to stamp documents. So that's not necessarily a misconception that many of you will have presently, but it's something that we get a lot of people asking about from overseas. So it's possible that you'll have one of your buyers request to see some kind of proof that the Des Moines partnership is certified to process certificates of origin. So the current industry is pretty complex, and really what we're doing is a very, very small part of the whole process of getting a shipment overseas. So as you can see, there's a lot of stages and a lot of back and forth during this whole process. Really what we're focused on is just on the certificate of origin and getting that processed electronically. So it's really focused on the step to get the documents to the customs official. Generally, that's going to be done by going either directly to the buyer overseas and having them deliver the documents to customs, sometimes through the freight forwarder, and in some cases it's also through the bank. So we have a lot of situations today where all of the documents are actually compiled into one single package, delivered to the bank, and then the banks will handle communicating back and forth amongst themselves to have the money actually transferred. So obviously that cost can vary pretty significantly. Courier bags to actually send the documents overseas can be pretty expensive, and we'll be looking at that in a bit later. So in terms of the actual cost to process certificates of origin, in this case we're doing a pretty low stamping fee for the manual processing, and saying that either you have a chamber or you have some kind of organization to stamp the documents that's able to do it for only $5, which is pretty low for what a standard rate for a chamber would be. Even though Des Moines is actually charging $15 for members and $50 for non-members, even though that might be a bit higher than $5, there are other costs incurred in actually having the documents created and processed. Actually bringing the documents to the chamber, there's a cost associated with that, as well as getting the documents to where they need to go. So if actually sending the certificate of origin to your importer, that can be pretty expensive, as well as just the general time lost in having an employee drive out to the chamber to get the documents manually processed. There's also the potential risk of having an error in the documents. Even if that risk is pretty low, it can still start to rack up over time. Whereas with eCertify, it is as simple as just immediately sending the document back to the chamber and almost immediately getting it stamped and sent back. There are other potential benefits as well. So one of the biggest ones that we've seen from larger companies is that they're able to consolidate all of their certificate processing down to just a single organization. So if you have multiple branches spread across the U.S., you're able to have just complete visibility amongst all those branches, and also have one specific office that's able to send all the documents to one particular chamber, have all of those documents processed and sent back by that one chamber. That way you won't have 10 different branches sending documents to 10 different chambers and having no real standardization there. There's obviously the benefit of not having to sort through files in order to find old certificates. It's pretty much an immediate process to just log into our website, open it up, and find the certificate that you're looking for. So if ever you need to revisit a certificate, it should be very quick and very easy to do. In actuality, we do guarantee that we'll be keeping all of the certificates on record for a minimum of 7 years. So if at any point during that period of time you need to go back and revisit a certificate of origin, it is as simple as just going to the website and opening it up. One other benefit I want to touch on today at least is that it's much easier to actually reliably send the documents to the chamber. My understanding is that you guys are expecting a fair bit of snow on Friday, and as the winter goes on, it's probably going to get progressively worse. So obviously it's a lot easier to just from your desk send a document to the Des Moines Partnership as opposed to have to, you know, find a way to get to the partnership during the blizzard. In terms of how you'd actually go about using eCertify, we try and make it as simple as possible from the exporter's approach. So first and foremost, you're going to be able to go to the Des Moines Partnership website, and you should be getting a link to that after this webinar ends. There'll be a pretty simple registration and login link. The registration link will just bring you to a page where you're able to input all of your company information and actually put out a registration request to the partnership. So after doing that actual registration, they'll be able to approve you as a new company, and from there you'll be able to just pretty simply log in through a dedicated web page. You'll just log in with your email and with the password that you choose. So it should be something that's relatively simple and relatively familiar to everyone. As mentioned, there will be an indemnification form that you'll agree to during the actual registration process. So when you're actually going about the steps of registering your company, you'll be able to see where to, what you're actually agreeing to there in terms of not holding the chamber liable for anything. Registration is pretty straightforward. Here's more of an enhanced view of it. So the information that is required here should be pretty simple and pretty familiar to everyone that's gone through an internet registration before. We're able to have exporters and freight forwarders registered in 2 separate methods. Banks generally, if you're going to be registering, would register as a freight forwarder. So for exporters, it is as simple as just going through this form and filling everything out. One export company can have multiple different users, so every single person that's going to be submitting documents can have their own unique user account. Again, that's useful if you have multiple branches across the U.S. as well, because you're able to have one centralized account with multiple different users on the account. Freight forwarders, in some cases, they may just want to be registering as an exporter if they're basically only going to be using eCertify in order to fulfill the requirements of a specific exporter. Then they have the option of just registering as an exporter. But if they'd like to, they can actually register in such a way where they'll have exporters listed on their account. So they'll have an extra section where they'll be able to manage their exporters as well as be able to get the files back to their exporters through eCertify as opposed to having to do it through any other means. In this case, it's more the freight forwarders acting as an umbrella body and managing the exporters. In particular, banks might want to look at that approach as well because they'd be able to have the exporters processing documents on their own, but then be able to collect the documents on behalf of the exporter. Okay. There are 2 primary ways that you're going to be creating the certificates of origin. So there's either the method in which you're going to need to be making it from scratch, or if you're going to be making it through the actual, if you're going to be making it on your own and just need to send it directly to the chamber. So if you're making it from scratch, you're going to choose a submission method called eCert Web Docs. And if we can actually look back real quick, yeah, there's a submission method that you'll choose during the registration. So again, there are 2 primary ones. Right now we're going to look at eCert Web Docs. As you can see, all we're looking at here is just a regular form. You're going to be filling in each of these pieces of information as best you can. And once everything's filled in, you'll be able to just submit this directly to the chamber. So what's essentially happening here is you're just filling in the information. We actually create the document as a PDF, have, for instance, the chamber logo, as well as some other information applied to the certificate. And then the chamber is able to stamp and sign the document and send it back. You're still able to create things like, you're still able to upload things like an invoice and a packing list. But in the situation in which you don't have a packing list or an invoice and need to have those created, we do have forms that you'll be able to fill out through the website as well in order to create those documents. Although I'd be relatively surprised if you didn't already have an invoice available. The secondary method to submit documents is possibly even more straightforward. We call this one eCert Submit. And it's where you're just going to be directly uploading documents to the Chamber of Commerce. So in this case, all you're doing is simply clicking on the little Choose File button there, navigating to the file that you want to upload, and sending it directly to the chamber. So in this case, all the files are already on your side. You already have a PDF version of the Certificate of Origin, and all you need to do is just send it directly to the chamber. In terms of when the chamber gets notifications of these, so as soon as you've filled everything in and you send the documents to the chamber, all the parties at the chamber that are able to stamp the document will actually get an email notification. That way they will be able to get to the document really quickly. Once they've actually stamped and sent the document back, you'll then get a notification letting you know that it's been stamped. And once the document's actually been paid, you'll then have the document sent to you by email, or you'll be able to download it again through the website. So this should all be pretty straightforward. You do have the option as well to include notes to the chamber. So if, say, you need to do something in a hurry or you need something expedited, you can mention in the notes that that's the case, and they'll actually get those notes via email when you submit the document. So some of the benefits should be pretty straightforward, and some of how it's done should be pretty obvious. When this document's being manually stamped, it can take hours to actually deliver it to the chamber, have it stamped and copied, and then brought back. To actually get the document to where it needs to go overseas, that can potentially take days, as opposed to just having it instantaneously sent over. You have the option of making online payment if, say, you prefer not to be invoiced or you prefer not to pay on a per transaction basis to the chamber. You have the option of setting up an online payment system where you're essentially just be adding items to a cart and making bulk payments on it one after the other. And additionally, there's no requirement on the exporter or the chamber side to keep copies of the documents available. So it's no longer a requirement that you'll have something available on your side to actually refer back to if say, there's ever a point in the future where you need to revisit the certificate. We have a number of users across the U.S. that have had pretty positive things to say. Feel free to read through those. And as mentioned, we do quite a lot of certificates across various different countries, and we've had pretty significant success during the period that we've been promoting it. As mentioned here, eCertify saves us a lot of time and money, and it's pretty straightforward and pretty cut and dry. Another one just suggesting how easy it is to use eCertify. So again, it should be pretty obvious where the benefits are and how easy it is to actually use eCertify. Here we have a pretty significant testimonial from one of our early adopters in the U.S., just saying directly that they're able to get their document back almost immediately, so there's very little delay. It's really, you'll get the document back as quickly as it takes the chamber to actually read over things and make sure that the certificate of origin and the invoice line up. And if that's the case, they're able to stamp and send it back to you very, very quickly. And from the export industry, just to finally recap, you won't have to worry about courier costs to send the documents to the chamber or to carry them overseas. There's a pretty big time saving in getting the document back immediately. Having the electronic certificate arrive before the goods can be a pretty major benefit as well. I see a lot of companies, if the documents are going with the actual shipment, they'll both arrive at the same time and realize that, on one of the trade documents there was some kind of mistake where something just wasn't stated correctly. And so that can make pretty big delays and can potentially cause missed deadlines to have to then mail the documents back. And obviously there's some reduced costs to actually export the documents. Okay, so hopefully that was pretty concise and pretty straightforward. So as mentioned, there's some pretty obvious benefits to doing this electronically, and it should be pretty easy to get started and get an account going on the exporter or freight forwarder side. So if there are any kind of questions, again, please do feel free to just type them into the chat, and we should be able to pretty easily answer them.
Okay, I'll just give you a minute or two in case anybody is typing a question. And again, if you don't want to ask that question now, you can always feel free and contact me as well. Okay, Alex, I don't see any questions being asked. Thank you so much again for your time and sharing your information with us, Alex. I believe it was very informative, and I hope everyone now has a better understanding of what eCertify is and how it can benefit you. If you would like to sign in to register for eCertify, please visit our website, which is www.desmoinesmetro.com. Again, that's www.desmoinesmetro.com, and Des Moines is spelled out. And you would click on the Economic Development tab at the top, and then click on International Trade, and the directions will be under the Certificate of Origin. And also, if you have any questions or concerns after today, if you'd like to receive on-site training, or if you would like to have me walk you through the process on the phone, please feel free to contact me. And again, my name is Beth Barker, and my phone number is 515-286-4950. Or you can email me at bbarker, that's B-A-R-K-E-R, at DesMoinesMetro.com. Again, that's bbarker at DesMoinesMetro.com. And you can also, if you have any questions for Alex, you can go through me, and we will go through each situation on a case-by-case basis. We will also be sending out a follow-up email, probably about 3 o'clock this afternoon, which will include all our contact information along with the eCertify registration instructions, as well as a link of this recording. So if you'd like to review the webinar again, you will be free to do so. Again, this concludes our webinar. Thank you again, Alex, so much, and all of our participants today for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.